There's real advantages to getting through the book of Revelation really quickly, especially when you're unfamiliar with it. I firmly believe everyone should read through the whole story one time before you get hung up on something like why is it that the locusts have the tail of a scorpion, right? Don't get hung up on one particular symbol or another until you've gotten through the whole thing and gotten the thrust of the story. Okay, so since we don't preach Revelation real often in our church, we've taken on a couple times in the last few years now, but we're still kind of in that stage where it's new, it's unfamiliar to us. So we want to take huge sections. We want to get through the book kind of quickly and get the main thrust before we get hung up on little details. There's real advantages to that, and I firmly believe that. But there's also real drawbacks because when we're taking on massive sections to try to get the thrust of the narrative, we have to miss stuff. We can't talk about the scorpion tail and how it connects in Ezekiel to this or that, right? We just have to keep moving. And I really felt that this week Sunday more than any other week. So far, I think it's been going really well and been kind of accomplishing the things I want to accomplish. I feel like the story, and this will become really clear because I'm going to have to show you the different positions when we get to Revelation chapter 20. But the main story, beginning to end, I feel like is still unclear, and there was an opportunity to kind of get at it this week Sunday, but we had to talk about the Antichrist and how that was received by the first century church, the original hearers of the book of Revelation, and how that's received by us. There's just some other things we had to deal with for the main thrust of the story. So one of the ways into that is to kind of address the use of numbers in the book of Revelation. We've done this a little bit. We've talked about the number 12, representation of the full number of the people of God. We've talked about the number 7 and the number 6, and kind of the interplay between 7 being your complete number and 6 being less than complete, incomplete, non-authoritative, right? Unholy, etc. But there's also this reoccurring period of time of 3.5 years. Sometimes it'll say it plainly, 3.5 years. Sometimes it'll refer to it as 1,260 days. So you can do the math in your head quick and get to roughly 3.5 years. Sometimes it refers to it as 42 months. A little bit easier math, but take a second. 12, 12, 12, 6, 42. Sometimes it refers to it as times, plural. Times, I should use this hand, it's more in the middle. Times, time, singular, and half a time, 3.5, right? Times, plural, time, and half a time, 3.5. So we get this period of 3.5 years that crops up all over the place. And I think deciding how we're going to interpret numbers, what function do numbers have for us in biblical prophecy, not just the book of Revelation, but in biblical prophecy. And if we're going to take the numbers 6 and 7 to be symbols, the number 12 to be a symbol, well, let's be consistent and see if it's possible for us to continue to taking numbers symbolically. This period of 3.5 years, should we treat it literally or symbolically? Okay, so we're bringing our scripture page back up. I have no idea where my mouse is. There it is. I have no idea if you can read this. If you can't, watch on a computer or something. On a phone, this is going to be a disaster. The first place we find this in Revelation is in Revelation chapter 11. Now, Revelation chapter 11, if you remember, we took 10 and 11 together. In 10, much like Ezekiel does, John is told to eat a scroll. And then he goes into the story of the two witnesses who we said, since they're represented by lampstands, and lampstands for us in the book of Revelation has clearly been identified as the church, that these two witnesses represent the church of God. with the power of the word, the power of God behind them, the law and the prophets. Link to that sermon. Maybe I'll remember to put it in a card. Well, these witnesses come on the scene in chapter 11, but first it says in verse 2, but exclude the outer court, do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. Remember, we said Gentiles can't mean non-Jews ethnically, because if you're a believer and I'm a believer, I hope we're not the ones trampling the holy city. But they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So there's that period of 3.5 years. And I will anoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, same amount of time, clothed in sackcloth. Now, we need to decide, one, if this is a literal amount of time, and some people say, yeah, there's periods of 3.5 years stacked up after one another to get to 7, right? It's a number of completion, so that follows. But not only is it symbolic or literal, but is it consecutive? Okay, so is there 42 months of the Gentiles trampling the holy city? Right, a picture of evil going out, triumphing over Christianity. Right, this anti-Christian work, secular work in the world, really increasing persecution, increasing tribulation, followed by a 3.5 year period where these 2 witnesses are going out with all power. And then later in the same passage, in verse 9, it says, for 3.5 days, some from every tribe, people, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. These are the 2 witnesses. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them, and all will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these 2 prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. But the breath of God comes in them after 3.5 days. Okay, so that's 3.5 days. That's different. Hold that in the back of your mind. So is there a period of 42 months where there's bad things going on for Christians, followed by 3.5 years where good things are going on for Christians, as chapter 11 says? Or to get into chapter 12 and 13, where we were this Sunday, here we have the exact opposite, where in chapter 11 it was 3.5 years of tribulation, followed by 3.5 years of excellence. In chapter 12, we've got 3.5 years of excellence or protection for the woman who fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. You see there? And it's repeated down at the end of the chapter here. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time. Okay? Same thing, 3.5 years. So here we start with 3.5 years of protection, followed by, in Revelation chapter 13, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. Again, that same period of time, 3.5 years. So in chapter 11, we find a season of tribulation followed by a season of protection. In chapter 13, we find a season of protection followed by a season of tribulation. Now, this may inform our post-millennial or premillennial brothers and sisters more than it does us. But I'm going to argue that these things are going on at the same time. It's the same period of time that stretches from the cross to the second coming. It's not a literal 3.5 years. We've been treating numbers symbolically all the way through. The beast doesn't literally have 10 horns. He is a man, according to 2 Thessalonians, so he can't actually be a beast, right? And so we've got some interpretive problems too if we want to be too literal. But it's not a literal amount of time. And we've seen this amount of time expressed before in Scripture. One that I didn't grab was from Luke chapter 4. Jesus says the period of Elijah's drought, famine during the time of Elijah was 3.5 years, a time of persecution for the people of God, or great tribulation for the people of God, 3.5 years. Same from Daniel, a very important section. In chapter 7 here, Daniel had been given a vision of 4 beasts, and the 4 beasts kind of look a lot like the one beast we find in Revelation 13, like a leopard, like a bear, etc., kind of all put together to be one Antichrist beast figure in Revelation 13. And Daniel 2 says that this final beast will speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Right? So same period of 3.5 years as Daniel's also being given a vision of the anti-Christian power in the world, the last season of which is a times, time, and half a time. And then also in Daniel chapter 12, we get the same exact thing. This is prophecy of the end times, but as a partial preterist, back to a previous video, I can say that this not only applies to the future, but also is accomplished in the past, because Daniel prophesied almost to the correct day. Amazing prophecy down here about the destruction of the first temple. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. And he had nailed that. The Roman emperor sacrificed a pig on the altar, the abomination that causes desolation, before they destroy the temple. And so Daniel nails that. So as a partial preterist, I can say that this applies not only to the happenings in AD 70, the destruction of the Second Temple, but also applies to the future, because this is a prophecy of the end times after all. So here we find Michael, the great prince who protects the people, and he arises. The same thing we found in chapter 12, and the archangel Michael throws the devil from heaven when Jesus overcomes by the blood of the Lamb and sits at the right hand of God. So at his death, resurrection, and ascension, there is a change, and it begins this period of time. Again, Daniel chapter 12, the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years again. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all the things will be completed. Okay, so the power of the people finally broken. Well, now bring back to mind the image of the 2 witnesses. So we've got this season on earth marked by increasing tribulations, yet protection for the people of God. That's an assurance of pardon, right? You cannot blot their names out of the book of life. They are eternally protected, though we exist in a season of tribulation. We're not exempt from tribulation in this season, those of us who live between the cross and the consummation. So we exist in this time of tribulation, yet protection. The gates of hell will not overcome the church of God until the people are finally broken, as Daniel prophesies, or to connect it with Revelation chapter 11, those 2 witnesses who represent for us the church, the holy people, they are overcome and lay as though dead in the city for 3.5 days. And so this is why I believe, I guess I depart from the most classic millennialism just a touch. And that is to say, I do believe in this increasing tribulation, this decreation, this rebirth of the nations, as Louis Berkhoff calls it, at the second coming of Christ. Now, I don't believe this is a 7-year period. I don't think these numbers are literal. I think it's this rebirth of the nation, this great increase in tribulation is quite instantaneous. I can't say that for sure, but it's my opinion that Jesus comes with this great, terrible judgment. And that's why we see when the people are finally broken, or when the church, when the 2 witnesses are finally put asunder, or the Belgic Confession says it may look like they've been put asunder. It's 3.5 days versus 3.5 years. We've got brief brief increasing tribulation with the second coming of Christ, and he collects his people to himself. So that's the story we see. We see the cross being the death blow to Satan. It is finished. The work is done. And then we've got this long season that we figuratively refer to as 3.5 years. And that is to say, a season of tribulation. A season of tribulation. Followed by brief increase in tribulation, or decreation, or rebirth of the nations, that comes with the second coming of Christ. So I'll say that timeline one more time. We've got the cross, which is the final word, and yet a 3.5 year, figuratively, right? We've been here for more than 3.5 years since the cross. A figurative 3.5 years of tribulation as these consequences of the climax of the cross are worked out, followed by brief increase in tribulation with the second coming of Christ. So hopefully connected those dots a little bit better than I could do in a morning service.